Okay, we're going to get started with some pre-calculus basics, the 6 trig functions. Let's start with something that you may be familiar with already. Sohcahtoa. Sohcahtoa. This is something that you probably learned in geometry class. Now let's write down something that you may or may not have heard. Cho, sha, cow. One of my students actually taught me that one. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue like Sohcahtoa, but I like it. Cho, sha, cow. What does this mean? What do these two things mean? Well, let's start with Sohcahtoa. Sohcahtoa tells us that the sine of theta is OH. What is that? That stands for opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of theta is AH. What does that mean? Adjacent over hypotenuse. And last but not least here, TOA, that tells us the tangent of theta is opposite over adjacent. Let's go with our cho, sha, cow. This stands for the cosecant. Cosecant of theta is HO. Well, what is that? That's just the reciprocal of our sine. So instead of opposite over hypotenuse, we're going to have hypotenuse over opposite. Our sha stands for the secant. Secant of theta is the reciprocal of our cosine, so that is hypotenuse over adjacent. And cow here stands for cotangent. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so that is adjacent over opposite. Okay, so now that we have all of our acronyms down, how can we use this information? Well, let's go with a right triangle. That's our right angle. Here's our theta. Let's say one leg is 3 and the other is 4. How can we find the hypotenuse? Well, remember from geometry, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b refer to the legs. C is the hypotenuse, always the longest side. So let's plug in our numbers. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. 9 plus 16 equals c squared. 9 plus 16 is 25 equals c squared. Take the square root of both sides, we get 5 equals c. So 5 is our hypotenuse. Okay, so now that we have that information, we can now work on our 6 trig identities. Let's start with sine. Sine of theta, we said, is equal to the what? Opposite over hypotenuse. So if we're here at theta, what side is opposite? That's 3, right? What is our hypotenuse? It's opposite the right angle, so that's 5. So sine of theta is 3 over 5. Let's go with cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, right? So what side is adjacent to theta? Well, 3 was opposite, so 4 is adjacent. And what is the hypotenuse? Again, across from the right angle, 5. So cosine of theta is 4 over 5. Now let's go with tangent. So tangent of theta, we said, was equal to opposite over adjacent. Opposite is 3. Adjacent is 4. So tangent is 3 over 4. Okay, so far so good, hopefully. Let's go with cosecant now. Cosecant of theta, we said, is really just the reciprocal of sine. So if we just flip our answer of sine, that would give us 5 over 3. And that makes sense, right? Because it's hypotenuse over opposite. Hypotenuse is 5, and the opposite side is 3. Let's go with the next one. Secant. Secant of theta, what did we say? That is the reciprocal of cosine. So hypotenuse over adjacent. So 5 over 4. And last but not least, cotangent. Cotangent of theta is the reciprocal of our tangent, so that would be 4 over 3. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everyone. All right, let's move on. Let's do another problem. How about we write the problem down, and then feel free to pause the video and do it on your own, and then come back and see if you got the right answer. All right, so here's our right angle, our theta, and our sides, our legs, 8 and 15. Okay, so go ahead, pause the video, and let's see if you get the right answer. Okay, so a squared plus b squared, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So that means 64 plus 225, 8 squared plus 15 squared equals c squared. 64 plus 225 is 289 equals c squared. Take the square root of both sides. C is 17. Okay, so now that we have our hypotenuse, let's go ahead and find our 6 trig functions. So sine of theta, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that would be what? 8 over 17. Cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse, that would be 15 over 17. And tangent of theta is opposite over adjacent. Opposite is what? 8. Adjacent is 15. With me so far? Good. Let's move on. So cosecant, remember, is the reciprocal of sine. So that would mean if we just flip that fraction, that would be 17 over 8. Secant of theta is the reciprocal of cosine, so that would be 17 over 15. And the cotangent of theta is the reciprocal of tangent, which means adjacent over opposite, so that is 15 over 8. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen, our 6 trig functions. All right, hopefully you got the right answer. Okay, let's move on. Let's go on to another problem. This one's going to be a little different, but nonetheless, we can do it. Let's say we were given that sine of theta equals 5 over 6. And we were asked to find the additional 5, the remaining 5 trig functions. How would we do that? Well, first, I think it would make sense to draw a triangle. Here's our right angle, here's our theta. What is sine of theta equal to? Well, according to Sohcahtoa, sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So let's label those in our triangle. So opposite would be here, hypotenuse would be here. So that means we need to find this side. Let's call that b. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? So 5 squared is 25. We don't know what b is. C squared would be 6 squared, which is 36. Subtract 25 from both sides. That gives us b squared equals 11. Take the square root of both sides. B equals the square root of 11. Okay, so we will put the square root of 11 right here. All right, so now that we have all the sides of our triangle, let's find our remaining 5 trig functions. So we know the sine already, so let's go with cosine. So cosine of theta is what? According to Sohcahtoa, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. So if we're right here at theta, adjacent would be what? This guy. That would be the square root of 11. What is our hypotenuse? 6. So the cosine of theta is the square root of 11 over 6. Let's go with tangent. Tangent of theta is what? Sohcahtoa, opposite over adjacent. So what is opposite? Opposite is 5. Adjacent is the square root of 11. Well, we know we can't leave that, so we must rationalize that. So once we do that, we're left with what? 5 square root of 11 over 11. And that is our tangent. Okay, so let's move on to our cosecant. So cosecant of theta, we said, is what? The reciprocal of our sine. So if our sine is 5 over 6, our cosecant would be 6 over 5. Let's go with secant of theta. Secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. So if our cosine is square root of 11 over 6, secant would be 6 over square root of 11. Well, we can't leave that radical in the denominator, so let's rationalize that. So that is 6 square root of 11 over 11. Last but not least, cotangent of theta is Sohcahtoa. What is our cow? Adjacent over opposite. What is adjacent? Square root of 11 over 5. And we can also look at the tangent, right? Tangent was 5 over square root of 11 before we rationalized it. Flip that, so that would give us square root of 11 over 5. Okay, so hopefully we went through this and you understood it. And I hope you had a great time listening. All right, talk to you next time. Bye.